Hey guys, hope everyone's doing really well today or tonight. I wanted to make a quick video on setting up a self-managed super fund. Now, a lot of people really, especially if you're young, aren't really going to know slash care, about anything regarding superannuation. But I think this is something that's really important to look at, especially if you are in a really good position financially. Maybe you've started investing in your own name. Maybe you've set up some trust and company structures, and maybe as a last resort, you've kind of, really maxed out the advantages in those structures, and you have a little bit of cash laying around. Potentially investing or contributing to super and getting it to a point where you have enough to potentially invest in property or invest in other assets. At that point, you might look at setting up a self-managed super fund. Now, as we're getting into, there's no real dollar amount limit on setting up a self-managed super fund, but it is something that gets increasingly more interesting as you kind of build up that balance over time. So maybe not so much for younger people, but it could be for some younger people, but I'd say more kind of a little bit older people. But yeah, let's get into exactly what this could look like. So, the very first thing we'll get into is exactly what is a self-managed super fund. Now, also known as an SMSF. So, in Australia, we all have superannuation funds that are used to invest in assets and are accessible at retirement. Now, for some, they may be able to access super earlier. For example, I know during 2019, we had an opportunity to access super earlier. There are some schemes as well if you're a first home buyer that you can access super as well. But long story short, it's a retirement account essentially, almost like a Roth IRA or a 401k in America, or KiwiSaver in America. But this is forced. I believe at the time of recording, it's about 12% of your annual salary that goes into your self-managed, or sorry, your superannuation. I personally regularly invest in my superannuation in my 20s to grow wealth for the future. And you can watch my previous video on that. Now, you can invest in lots of different ways and in lots of different mediums. I've invested quite a bit in my own personal name at this point, but investing in my super has been really beneficial. Obviously, you get there's some tax advantages to it. There's also some I guess asset protection, or I guess not asset protection, but more it's locked away so you can't access it if something happens to you. Benefits in that respect, but it's also really great as well, just because for a fact that in the future you do have a nest egg waiting for you essentially, and there might come a point where you've already made a lot of money in your own personal name, and that money could either go to your kids, maybe it's for their education, maybe you end up donating that money, but whatever it is, I think it's a really good option for some people to kind of park some money away, maybe not as their first option, but maybe an option once they've exhausted other investment mediums. So, what a self-managed super fund exactly does is it really kind of gives you control to manage your assets, as opposed to an industry super fund. So ugh, an industry super fund is something that all people kind of have as a base. They at their first job, or maybe their employer has a certain super fund they use. That's likely going to be an industry super fund, or a preferred super fund for them. And normally you might be able to invest in stocks, REITs, bonds, commodities, maybe different international markets. And it's kind of packaged in a way that's really easy, and you can say yes or no to a certain type of investment. Whereas a self-managed super fund really gives you the ability to tailor different investments and to, I guess, access different markets that an industry super fund just won't let you do. And that might be, for example, art, collectibles, cryptocurrency, um, purchases of real estate property instead of a REIT. So this can be really interesting for some people, especially if you're really trying to tailor your self-managed super fund situation and invest in assets that I guess normally you wouldn't be able to access or invest in. And look, for me, I think this is really interesting for the fact that you're able to get property loans through self-managed super funds. You're not able to do so in a industry super fund. Now, in terms of what a property loan could look like, they generally are higher at a higher interest rate compared to if you're investing in your own name or a company or a trust. But look, for some types of property investments or people, this could kind of I guess work out well for them. Really not many. There's not many providers that give that do loans within property superannuation funds, but there are a couple of them, and yeah, they are at a higher rate, maybe some higher fees. But for some people, that works really well. Ultimately, unless you kind of contribute more money into your superannuation, you're not really able to grow any other way apart from obviously, having that money grow over time. But being able to, I guess, have access to leveraged, a leverage asset that will grow exponentially higher because the cost base for the asset is higher. It could be really interesting, even though you are paying some higher fees in doing so. Now, for a self-managed super fund, depending on your situation, it could create more wealth. But just keep in mind that it is a more expensive medium of investing through, and it is intensive. There are more audits. There's more scrutiny when it comes to self-managed super funds. There is more talking to potentially financial advisors, accountants, probably people, etc. So there's just more to do with a self-managed super fund versus an industry super fund, which we, for the most part, most people invest through. Now, is an SMSF right for you? I mean, a few points here. You need to be willing to be more involved and open to an increased amount of costs and paperwork. Even though I'd say for 99% of people, industry super funds work really well. They, generally speaking, are quite low in fees and quite low in headaches. But if you're really someone that's wanting to tailor and optimize your current superannuation situation, then this could work really well for you. Now, yeah, as I mentioned earlier in the video, higher balances will make more sense, but it could be done with any amount. I'd say ideally $50,000 plus. Anything lower than that, and your setup costs and annual ongoing costs are quite a big proportion of your actual cost base. So unless you already are looking to kind of really kind of pile in, or you've set up a plan to pile in money into super, and you might set up the self-managed super fund now, and then you kind of over the next year really kind of invest or pour money into that, maybe using catch-up contributions, then that also could work really well for you. Now, I'll personally be doing this later in 2025 this year, to access property loans and leverage for the future. That's kind of what I mentioned earlier, where you're not able to get access to leverage assets otherwise within super. So this could be really interesting. It does cost more, but obviously you're doing it in a way that the costs of this structure and the costs of the interest repayments are less so than what you're going to get through that capital growth and the rental income, etc., which is really great. Now, as it is still superannuation, you won't be able to access it until retirement or about 65 years of age, but this might change. Um, there's no way around this. So just know that that money will be locked up. There's no way to really easily access that money. It really is a nest egg for the future. And if you want to invest normally, which you should do, I think personally, through your own name and then super as an afterthought, that could work really well. I wouldn't say that this is your first point of call, just because if something were to happen and you need to get access to that money, you can't get access to that money. So works well for some, but not everyone. Now, a couple of considerations and tips for using a self-managed super fund is that there is some extra compliance involved. For example, annual tax returns and audits. You can be held responsible otherwise. This isn't a point the thing to your accountants or your financial planners. If something were to go wrong, you're going to be responsible for self-managed super fund stuff up. So you need to be educated. You need to be willing to really kind of put the work in and speak to people that are experts in this field, and just make sure you're complying and you're all above board. Now, especially for property, there is less flexibility when it comes to investing through a superannuation self-managed super fund or your own personal name. In this case, they will require better yields, and you might not have the ability to release equity. There might be some issues when it comes to renovations and refinancing, etc. It's just not as easy as it is in your personal name. So keep that in mind. It can be a headache to revert back to an industry super fund once you kind of moved over to a self-managed super fund. So definitely speak to a professional prior. Definitely kind of get an idea of how serious you are when it comes to superannuation. Because it's, again, like I said, for the most part, for most people, it is very easy to just stick to an industry super fund, do quite well, and then kind of hit retirement and access that money versus really trying to double down and really squeeze the most out of superannuation. But again, for some people, that works really well. So it just depends. Now, if you're not sure, move your super to a decent industry fund. I currently use Vanguard in Australia, but I've used other ones like Kogan, which was previously, I think it's closed now. But just go to a low fee industry super fund, but make sure that their returns are quite good. Make sure that they have the options, like for example, life insurance or other insurances that you really want. And then, yeah, I guess you can't go wrong. Just make sure you're monitoring performance, fees, etc. Make sure you're happy with the situation. And yeah, if you do want to end up taking it up a notch, if you're really serious, if you have a really great balance, then by all means, the self-managed super fund might be really good for you. So yeah, hopefully you guys have really enjoyed the video. If you have any questions, let me know down below. But otherwise, I'll see you guys in the next one. Peace.